Alright, welcome to Unit 9, Lesson 7 here, and really, nothing new here today. We're just going to review all the three main ways of solving by factoring, completing the square and quadratic formula. So let's take a look at the first one. In each case, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you guys to pause the video and actually try it. So as I said, get everything on one side. You always want it equal to 0. Okay, so bring over the 8x, get everything on one side, so minus 8x. Minus 8x plus 2 to the left. So now you have x squared minus 3x and negative 2 minus that's minus 10 equals 0. So x box, I need my a and my c. My a is 1, my c is negative 10, so you multiply them to get negative 10. My b is a negative 3. Well, the only way to get factors of 10, folks, are 1 and 10, 2 and 5, and of course 2 and 5 subtract the 3, so I need 2 and 5, and 1's plus 1 minus, I get that minus 10, so negative will be on the 5. So we set it up, x squared, use the 2 in the middle here, so minus 5x plus 2x minus 10 equals 0. And we're going to do some factor by grouping, so I will group the first pair and the second pair of numbers. So I can pull out an x. I'm left with x minus 5. And the second one, pull out a 2. I am left with x minus 5 if you divide it. So one pair is x plus 2. The other factor is x minus 5. Tee it up. So x plus 2 equals 0. So when you move the negative 2 over, you'll get a negative 2. There's the one answer. And x minus 5 equals 0. Move the 5 over, so you'll get positive 5. Those are your two answers on that one. Over here on completing the square, same thing. First thing, bring your 3x over to the left. Get everything on one side. Bring over the 4. Although if you know what you're doing, you're going to turn around and bring that right back in a moment. And my bad, that should be a minus 4, not a plus. So minus 4, don't forget my x there. So I get an x squared, a minus 12x, a plus 20 equals 0. Move the 20 over because we're going to do completing the square, so it's a c. Like I said, if you caught that right away, you could have done that. So x squared minus 12x now equals negative 20. There is nothing in front of the x squared, so you can put your plus box here and plus a box over here if you want. 20. Half a negative 12 here, this is your b, is going to be a negative 6. Square it, you get 36, and so also 36 on the other side since there's nothing out in front of the x. Put my x in front, put it in parentheses and square, unless you want to do the AC and factor that whole left side, your choice. Negative 20 plus 36 is going to be a positive 16. We are not looking for vertex, so we're not bringing that over. We are ready, however, we got a perfect square on the one side, so we can take the square root of both sides. That's how you undo it. I will get then an x minus 6 equals plus or minus 4. So one answer is x minus 6 equals 4. The other answer is x minus 6 equals a negative 4. In each case, we add 6 to both sides. So on this side, we will end up getting an answer called 10. Over here, if I add 6 on the negative 4, I get 2. And those answers can be checked to make sure that they work. Okay. Moving on. For my quadratic formula, move the 5x to the left. Once again, get everything on one side, so minus 5x. And a minus 15. Put a minus 15 over here. I'm a little crowded with a small space. So I get x squared minus 8x. And 16 minus 15 is plus 1 equals nothing. If you tried x box, it will not work. So I'm going to do quadratic formula, which means I got to pick out my a is 1, my b is a negative 8, and my c is equal to 1 also. So I do x equals negative of b, so the negative of a negative 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so a negative 8 being squared, minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 1. all over 2 times a, which is 1. So start cleaning it up. The negative of negative 8 is positive 8, plus or minus square root of 64, and minus 4 times 1 is minus 4, all over 2. So x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 60 over 2. Now, normally I would go and break up 60 into 4 and 15 and get a 2 radical 15 out of it. However, directions say to the nearest tenth. So I would get your calculator out, and you would do that in a calculator. You're going to take 8 plus the square root of 60, whatever that turns out to be. Divide that by 2, and I'll get our answer in a moment here. And the other one is x equals 8 minus the square root of 60 on your calculator, and divide that answer by 2. And you should get this approximately. So I'm going to bring those up in a little bit here. So we'll get 7.9 as the answer and 1/10, so 0.1 as the other answer. All right. Now we're going to do a quadratic, same thing again, but this time in simplest radical form, which means it's not going to probably come out nice. So let's take a look at that. So on this one, I would add my 2x to the left. Add my 2x to the left. Subtract my 7, and I will get an x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals nothing. My a is 1. My b is equal to 6. And my c is a negative 5. So I will do x equals the negative of b, which is a positive 6, plus or minus square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 5. And that whole thing all over 2 times a is 1. So I will get a negative 6 plus or minus square root of 36 plus 20 when you multiply the numbers divided by 2. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus square root of 56 divided by 2. Now, 56 can be broken up, so you start off square root of 56. I'm going to do it off the side here. If I take half of that, it's 28. In my list, it's just above 25. 25 won't go into 56. Then the next perfect square down, 16 won't go in there. 9 doesn't go in there because it's really 8 and 7, but 4 does. So it's the square root of 4 times 14. 14 is 2 and 7, so I can't break it down anymore. So that's really 2 radical 14, which I can't break down. Okay? So as far as my answers go, I get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 14, all divided by 2. Personally, I like my v method. 2 goes into all 3 of those. So my final answer is a negative 3 plus or minus square root of 14. And that's in simplest radical form. Okay? So that's reviewing all the types by factoring, by completing the square, by quadratic formula nearest tenth, and by quadratic formula in simplest radical form. So let's move on to 1 or 2 more types of questions, and then you'll be ready to roll through anything we can throw at you. All right, now we're going to try to relate this to a graph. They basically give you the typical quadratic with the vertex form here on the shift, as shown in the graph below. What are the values of h and k? Well, you need to know the vertex right here on the graph. So that point right there is over 2, and it is up 4. So my vertex, or turning point, is 2, 4, right? So obviously I shifted to the right 2, so in the equation here it's actually the opposite here. So it's going to be x minus 2 squared, and then plus k, which is the 4. So my h is equal to 2, and my k is equal to 4. And you get that right out of the vertex. And that would prove that, hey, I went the opposite of minus 2, which is 2 to the right, and I went up 4. Those are my shifts, so don't forget your old shifts. And that's how that comes into play there with this formula right here, the form. Now, part B says, what happens when you try to solve for the zeros and f given these values from H and K from part A, and why can't you find them? Take a look here, guys. Here's the x-axis. Does this parabola ever come down and hit it? No. So I have no real solutions, okay? Because it does not hit the x-axis. So solutions. Y does not hit x-axis. Intersect if you want. It's the better math word. Okay. Part C, actually, how did that show up in the graph? And I kind of explained that back in here. They were actually asking you probably to plug zeros in up here, but it's not important to us. So we're going to move on. That's the key here, understanding this form with the H and the K is your vertex and how the shifts play in there, and the fact that it never hits the x-axis, so you have no real zeros. Okay? One more slide to go. All right, so it says, which of the following in this exercise 3 does the quadratic have no real zeros? And there may be more than one. So determine using quadratic formula. Verify each by looking at the standard view on the graph. So using your graphing calculator. So I want you to pause the video. So pause video. And I want you to do all three. And do all three to determine which ones aren't real and why. Let's see if you can discover that. So pause the video, do all three. So you must have shown work in this first one here. You should actually get an answer of x is equal to -7 plus or minus 2 radical 5, no, 3 radical 5, sorry, and the whole thing over 2. This one here, you should have gotten x is equal to -2 plus or minus the square root of -44, all over 6. And yes, that can be reduced further, but I'm going to talk about that in a second anyways. And this bottom one right here, you should have gotten x is equal to -1 and x is equal to 3/5. So, if you plug the third one in the calculator, you know you got nice roots, don't you? They're called rational roots. This one here has irrational roots because of the square root of 5. And you might say this one has irrational roots too, but we got a big issue right here. The negative. You can't take the negative of a square root. You can sit there all day, but there is no number times itself to give you a negative under there. Because a negative times negative is positive, and positive times positive is positive. So this one is your answer that has no real roots. We will talk about this in class, but that's the answer. You better make sure you show all your work for all three of these, not just this answer part. Okay? See you in class. Have a good one.